Hi, thanks for joining me. I'm Dan Thompson, and in today's brief webinar, I will be talking about improving student learning and meeting program requirements by implementing formative assessment in clinical settings. So in today's webinar, there's just three main objectives I want to hit on, and of course I used the bold and italics feature there to make the important terms jump out. We really want to focus on the instructional gaps that we have in clinical scenarios and find ways to use formative assessments to fill those gaps. Hopefully after this you'll also be able to use formative assessments in the mapping process of your curriculum, so we can satisfy accreditation requirements. Typically, we think about mapping our curriculum for the didactic years in medical education, but we also have to worry about the clinical years as well. So this is a method to help that. And then finally, we'll actually be able to implement these formative assessments in our rotations. And so in today's presentation, I'll kind of go through our process, why we do it, what we do, and how that's done. And then finally just kind of finish off with some helpful tips and tricks that we learned along the way through trial and error. So first and foremost, there's hurdles involved in this, right? So in clinical settings, the student experience is often limited to the patients that our students see. So for example, in flu season, students on rotations are going to see more flu cases, whereas different times of year they may see different presentations. However, when we look at the learning objectives for each rotation, we have these robust amount of objectives that students are supposed to meet. However, oftentimes, again, they're limited to what the patients present with. So today I'll kind of talk through different ways to get to ensure that this information isn't only received by students, but that also we assess it, and then therefore we can prove that students are learning it when it comes accreditation time. And that's the bottom note there. So we'll set students up to learn this information, and then most importantly assess it and map it. That way we can it's twofold: ensure that students learn it, and again be able to map it. So we started here with the why in our institution, and really the why was there was a desire for students to get that instructional material that didn't always come with patient interactions, or in addition to patient interactions. So really it's a way that we wanted to make sure that every student's experience, whether you went to a specific rotation in February or in June or in November, it would always be as similar as an experience as possible. And while we are not in control of the patients that are coming in, we are in control of the materials that we're giving them and the assessments. So we realized in this process that the assessment was really vital to this. So we know we can give students readings to do or videos to watch or things of that nature, but we do at the end of the day need to assess to ensure that they're retaining that information, because we do want to make sure we're improving student outcomes throughout those third and fourth years. The important part of this, the assessment, is that it does engage students in that necessary material. They know, the assessment kind of keeps them honest, makes sure that they're going through and reading the materials, watching the videos, going through the cases that we give them, all those things. Obviously knowing that assessment's coming is something that they'll be preparing for. And one really valuable part is that it allows students to self-assess throughout this. So throughout this process, students can see where they're at in their third and fourth years as they go through their clinical rotations. We always want them to be aware of their learning and really take control of and responsibility in their own learning. While we as the institution play a big role in that, we also want students to be aware of that as well. So that was the why. Those were the driving forces behind us looking into assessments in our clinical settings. And I mentioned before on the last couple slides that we're going to talk about mapping for accreditation. That kind of came along with it. It was a big time added bonus for us that we may not have necessarily planned for out of the gates, but then realized throughout the process it was a great opportunity for us. So what did we do? We made weekly formative assessments in our rotations. Our rotations typically are a month long, so we had just brief. Sometimes there were take-home quizzes. Sometimes we would have students gather in a conference room and take a quiz. So it was really up to the rotation. So obviously all rotations are different. Some scenarios may have students on the same rotation but in different locations. So we would do take-home quizzes for this information. And so these quizzes were obviously all made through ExamSoft and distributed out to students in each rotation for the month. And I'll get into kind of the logistics of that in a few slides here. We also had rotation summative assessments. Not all rotations did this. We didn't want to over-test them, so the rotations that tended to do the weekly formative assessments typically stuck with that and didn't do the end of rotation, at the end of the month assessment. And then we had, others that didn't do the weekly rotations, but then did the summative assessments at the end of the month. For the most part, these summative assessments, those rotations did have students, come to a central location, whether it was back at our school or in a conference room at their clinic or hospital, and take the exam there, kind of in a more secure environment that you'd see in a typical in-class exam. And then we'd also do pre-post exams. These were really valuable, especially when I mentioned previously in looking at students being able to self-assess. So when students would get the results from the pre-exam, they could see the knowledge gaps that they had, where they needed to improve, and really allow them to set their own learning objectives throughout the month to see what they need to improve on during that rotation. And then with the post-exam, we can track their success throughout that month. And then again, students can assess that as well, so they can see how much they've advanced, and if there are any areas where they're still underperforming, what they need to improve on as they move in to their next rotation. So the how of this. So we implement this by making, we may have folders in our ExamSoft, in our assessment folders. We do one for each clerkship. And then within each clerkship we have, let's say we have the one that does the types of clerkships that do weekly formative assessments. We have those assessments permanently available in the folder. And by permanently available, I mean as long as ExamSoft will let us bump that exam out into the future, we'll set it to be available today, and it will be available for the next 3 years. The way that we manage which students can see it and which students can't is that we move the students in and out of the courses. So each rotation has its own course which has its own student roster, and then we upload those assessments to that course to make them available to the set student roster. And what we do is we change out the student roster month to month, sometimes even week to week, to ensure that the appropriate students are getting the appropriate assessment. I keep saying we. On the next slide, I actually will go into the roles and how we define those here, and who does what in this, we, as we set these exams. So we also do this in an easy to report manner, but we also want it to be a meaningful learning experience. So that was something we kind of ran into, is that we wanted it to be, there was this accreditation element to it. And so that's why we chose to map in ExamSoft. So with each of the quiz items, we can map those to a specific clerkship and the learning objectives within a specific clerkship. So we could say, yes, these are our learning objectives, and yes, students are meeting them, because here, look, we've assessed them on this content, and this is how they've done. Prior to that, it's just observational data in the clerkship, and again, they're at the mercy of what patients come to present with. This way we can say, yeah, they have learned this information during this time, we gave it to them, we assessed it, here's the proof. And so that's why we, in doing that through the mapping with ExamSoft, again, it made it meaningful for students because we gave them information and assessed it, and then gave them the feedback on the assessment, which is always very important to have the feedback element, but also being able to report it is just as simple as running a very quick and easy longitudinal report and exporting that out as an Excel file, which is, if you're new to ExamSoft, is a very easy process. At the end of this, I have my contact information, so feel free to contact me on that if you are going through that process yourself. So, here at OSU, we've defined 3 major role players in this: the faculty, the Office of Educational Development, which I'm a part of, and then the students. So the faculty obviously do all content creation, and they provide the feedback for students, which is pretty straightforward. In our area, we actually, not only do we create the assessments, but we're the ones, when I say we make them available to certain students, we're the ones that move students in and out of the rotation rosters or the clerkship rosters. So again, the quiz is permanently available, but we move these students in and out so that it's only available to the students that should be receiving the quiz at the appropriate time. And then we pull the results and send them. Typically we do it at the end of the month. Again, sometimes there's weekly ones and they want the quick feedback, which we're more than happy to support because we really believe in giving timely feedback to students so they can use it as a learning method. And then finally, for the students, they have to complete the assessments on their own time depending on the clerkship. So sometimes you do have meeting times for quizzes or exams, and that they're assigned to come to. These other ones, sometimes it's open for a whole entire month for them, and while we do send a reminder or two, it really is up to the students to make sure that gets done in a timely fashion. So some helpful tips that we learned along the way. As I mentioned before, permanently leave those quizzes available for students. Leave them open to download. It's nice too because when you have one assessment that's permanently open, all stats are collected within that one assessment. So if you want to look at how students are performing as a whole across a whole year in a clerkship on a specific exam, you don't have to pull multiple exam stats. You can pull them for one exam. Use a single password for all quizzes, so no matter what rotation they're on and no matter what month, use the same password. It just makes it easier for students, and it cuts down on the amount of emails they have to go through to search for exam passwords, and it also is going to save you a lot of time as faculty or staff because you're not going to have to field questions from students about what the password is for each specific quiz. They'll know what it is by the second month. They get used to putting in the same password. Always do one download per student, especially if you forget to take students out of specific rotations. If there's only one download for them, they can only take it once, so it doesn't matter if you leave them in there, they'll never see it again. So I mentioned that fourth note a bunch of times about moving them in and out of the rosters to see when they can download the assessment. One thing that we've learned the hard way here: always set reminders in your whatever you use, your email or Google Calendar or whatever is your method for that. Set reminders. It's when you're only doing something once a month. Sometimes it's easy to forget it. So and there's always the students that want to get in there on day one and start to look at their assessments, especially when they have the pre-test. So set those reminders and get those rosters moved appropriately. When there are end of rotation exams, always have support staff and extra computers available. A lot of times when you're dealing with these clerkship sites, these are folks that are not familiar with ExamSoft in the slightest. So even though to those of us that have used it more often, the troubleshooting is usually pretty simple, it's completely foreign to them, and that technology tends to scare them a little bit. So we always make sure that we set times, and when it is local to us, we'll have someone from our staff run over to the exams to make sure it runs smoothly, and we'll always bring an extra computer or two. And do know student passwords will be forgotten. In their didactic courses, they know their passwords pretty well, it seems. Once they move on to clerkships, they're really happy not to take written exams anymore, and then we fool them and give them more ExamSoft written exams. So they forget their password in that process because they're so happy to move on from it. So always be prepared that you're probably going to have to reset passwords on occasion in the system. Here specifically moving forward with this process, we're going to continually mapping our rotation assessment items to the goals and objectives. That's just part of the accreditation process. So, I mentioned quite a bit so far that mapping is a big part of this, because when you can map your assessment items to the learning objectives or the goals for each rotation, you can prove to accreditors that yes, our students are achieving the goals and objectives for each rotation, and here's the proof. We have the statistical data to support that. And instead of just saying, yeah, these are our goals and objectives, while it's nice to list the goals and objectives for what students are doing in that month, there's still no proof behind that you're actually assessing students and ensuring that they're learning that information. And as kind of talked about that third and fourth, or second and third note a little bit there already, that does help complete that curricular mapping process on the back end, and it just shows that we're instructing and assessing our students the way that we intend to do so. And finally, we want to look at is it the value added? Are these assessments improving student outcomes? So it's our hypothesis right now that this is going to improve student outcomes because we're ensuring that they're going through the rotation content outside of just the patients that they see in order to complete these assessments. So we're going to follow up on that. So as we have more and more data, especially as we have more students complete level 2 of the boards, we'll be able to review this process. While it seems great to us in theory, and we're really proud of the process we have in now, we always use these exam stats and analytics to make sure that we are indeed improving student outcomes. If we are, we will most certainly continue with this, and if we aren't, especially not to the degree that we hope to, then we'll review it and either alter it or move to something else. So that is it for this brief webinar. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions or comments, again, please feel free to email me or tweet me on the information on the screen. And have a great day. Thank you.